Welcome, 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 lovely sisters and brothers. Thank you so much for being here this morning, for tuning in to one of the channels on Facebook, Rumble, and YouTube. Today I continue with part 2 from the book, The Story of Isis and the War on Bloodlines. It is not without a reason that I have to do this. We continue with part 2, and we started yesterday with the first part of this chapter 12 of this book, and this chapter 12 is a very long chapter. It contains almost 50 pages. So let us continue with the second part, and we start with the House of Stuart. And I would highly recommend you to watch the first part that I did yesterday. All right. The House of Stuart was ruling England for a little over 100 years, ending in 1714 with Queen Anne, who reigned from 1702 to 1714, who married the British monarch King William III, also known William of Orange, who died in 1702, whereafter Anne took over the throne of England, Scotland, and even Ireland, to which the bloodline was also spread, but is not within the scope of our story. She married King George of Denmark, and she had no surviving children. I, Wes Penry, the writer of this book, must say it is amusing to notice that when big changes occur and a female is seeding a new dynasty, she is almost always portrayed in history as the only surviving female of her birth family in question. It goes a straight line through the bloodlines. Sorry, I need to start with the House of Windsor. George V, from 1910 to 1936, son of King Edward VII, became the first king of the House of Windsor, marrying Mary of Teck. From 1867 to 1953 that this lady lived. Time for a new dynasty. So let us introduce either a Mary Elizabeth, or Sophia, or a mix of them. Several women suddenly showing up with the same names. And Mary is in actuality a title, and so is Elizabeth. Elizabeth is also in actuality a title and not really a name. Mary was a first cousin to Queen Victoria, and her grandmother on the male side was a direct descendant of George III of Hanover, whose parents were both German. So let us examine Mary a little more, and the reason I think she might have been another Isis. Mary of Teck. Mary was curiously a redhead, although her parents were not. It seems to no one knows why Mary had red hair. It seems like it was high time and overdue to strengthen the bloodline again. And this time the empowerment came from Germany. The same royals who had infiltrated the British monarchy in Mary of Teck. We might have another Isis incarnation. This time it could have been an attempt of Isis at least to put some of her DNA into the Windsor German royal blood. Germany was Marduk's domain. And later on, we start to get more in-depth clarity about the bombardments done in the Second World War on Germany. There is a documentary known as Hellstorm. Please watch this documentary. It is not really pleasant to look, but then you get an in-depth understanding of what has happened to the German people. And what has happened to the German people is as awful as the same that has happened to the Jewish people. So there is a reason for the tremendous attack on Jewish and German people in the Second World War. And Wes Penry, the writer of this book, will go dive into this later on. But there is an history to it, and this is why he has written this book about ISIS and the war on bloodlines, because it all has to do with this. And this is all just a mere introduction to further understanding of what has happened later on in history. So Germany was Marduk's domain, and the German royal bloodline had been severely diluted on purpose by Marduk, as we shall see in the next upcoming chapters. Marduk is one of the beings that is pulling the strings here on Earth. His actual plan is to dominate over the entire Earth through technology and through artificial intelligence. Marduk's plan is to have each and every human soul and spirit captured in technology, so that he can manipulate and control us even more easily than he can do right now. Marduk wants to claim this earth as his, as well as all human souls as his so-called children. Yeah, so he wants to have us humans as his possession. This is a very deep understanding, and this is in actuality the main thing and the main script that is being rolled out all over this earth. But there's another player on the stage, and the name of this player is known as Enki. Enki has the same plan. Enki also wants us captured in technology. He wants to imprison our soul and spirit in technology. So he is very happily with the fact that Marduk is rebuilding the singularity metaverse. This is not new, my lovely sisters and brothers. This whole metaverse singularity thing was already going on in Atlantis the Second. In America, Enki tries to rebuild a third Atlantis empire. This is why the things are happening in America as they are happening. Both have a sinister agenda. Both want to be the throne of Orion. Um, but Marduk wants to kill off Enki. Enki wants to kill off Marduk. And they both are using the entire human soul group for this purpose. It's about time that we wake up to this agenda. And both Enki as well as Marduk want to have the throne of Orion, and eventually they will use the entire human soul group to go into a cosmic war against Orion so that they can get the throne. This is what it is all about. This is a play that is going on for uncountable thousands of thousands of thousands of thousands of thousands and so on years. And it is about time that we, humanity, are waking up to this sinister plan. And all the wars on earth are all about these bloodlines. So that is why I am doing this book reading, to give you more in-depth information, and at the same time I also add extra information to it so that you, my lovely sisters and lovely brothers, are getting a deeper understanding of the real deal play that is being played out here on earth. And the script is everywhere the same. It is a script that is being rolled out, and the overlords are the ones that are giving their commands to the proxies and minions here on earth, whom we call oligarchs, elite, or cabal, or Illuminati, or whatever label they have been given to them. These are nothing more than just proxies and minions, one time working for Enki, then another time working for Marduk. So, as we will see in the next upcoming chapters, all right, perhaps this was Isis' early effort in modern time to counter Marduk and save the Jesus Magdalene bloodline by reintroducing her DNA into the British monarchy. If ever so little through Mary of Tech, she might have planted a seed there, so she could continue a mission of her own in the next few generations, free from Marduk's influence. And ISIS, the role of ISIS is in actuality to try to get humans and the human soul group out of the hands of Marduk and Enki. That is her attempt. When George V died in 1936, Mary became the Queen Mother when her son, George VI, who reigned from 1936 to 1952, ascended the throne. When I researched this last part of the Windsor dynasty, I noticed something interesting. Presuming Mary Tech was Isis, her son George VI married an Elizabeth, This time Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, who lived from 1900 to 2002, known to us as the Queen Mother. She was English dash Scottish with German blood as well. And what was the name of the Queen Mother's daughter? Of course, Elizabeth, coronated in 1952 as the Queen of England as Elizabeth II, who reigned from 1952 to 2022. She gave birth to Charles, who married Diana. That is when it really gets interesting. But first thing first. Although the British bloodline was most likely strengthened again by Mary of Teck because of Isis soul-spirit DNA mixed with that of the physical body, it was of course not enough. After all, the inbreeding with the Germans previously, the bloodline was weak, even more so after Queen Elizabeth II's marriage to Prince Philip. Um, Therefore, it needed to be strengthened further, as we will discuss after we have investigated Prince Philip, which we will do now. So let us dive into the House of Mountbatten. Philip was born on the Greek island of Corfu in 1921 as Philippos, Prince of Greece and Denmark. Interesting, again, Denmark comes here into play. But he had his toes dipped into most royal dynasties in Europe. There's hardly any dynasty in Europe which he did not have a blood connection to. His father was Prince Andrew, a younger brother of King Constantine of Greece, and his mother was Princess Alice of Battenberg, from which the House of Mountbatten got its name. So Princess Alice, being German, mountain translates to berg or berg in German. The House of Mountbatten took its name in 1917. The name was adopted on July the 14th, 1917, 3 days before the British royal family changed its name from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to, between quotation marks, Windsor. So that name change stems from July the 11th, 1917, by members of the Battenberg family residing in the United Kingdom due to the rising anti-German sentiment among the British public during World War I. So the name is a direct angelicization of the German Battenberg or Batten Mountain, the name of a small town in Hesse. The titles of Count and later Prince of Battenberg had been granted in the mid-19th century to a morganatic branch of the House of Hesse-Darmstadt, itself a cadet branch of the House of Hesse. In other words, the current House of Windsor changed the name of their dynasty from the German name Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to Windsor, not to show they are major descendants of German royalty. Through inbreeding with German royal bloodlines during the 1800s, almost 90% of all sitting monarchs during the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha took German consorts, which also was devastating for the pure bloodline as mentioned earlier. The Battenbergs of Germany needed to do the same. So, in 1947, Prince Philip took his mother's family name and changed it to the more English-sounding name, Mountbatten. When marrying Queen Elizabeth II, the royal family also stopped interbreeding with pure German royalty for a generation after they changed their name to Windsor to wait for the British anti-German hostility to wear off after the World Wars. So, however, when both world wars were over, the interbreeding continued with Queen Elizabeth II marrying Prince Philip in 1947, who was half German, half Greek, and also had ties with Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Iceland via the House of Schleswig-Holstein, Sonderburg, Glücksburg on his mother's side. So Lady Louise Mountbatten became Queen Consort of Sweden after marrying King Gustav VI Adolf of Sweden. The origins of the House of Mountbatten, or rather the House of Battenberg, is so well described in Wikipedia that it is unnecessary for me to divine it in my own words. So here is Prince Philip's immediate ancestry. Quote from Wikipedia: "The Mountbatten family are a branch of the German House of Battenberg. The Battenberg family was a morganatic branch of the House of Hesse-Darmstadt, rulers of the Grand Duchy or Duchy of Hesse in Germany. The first member of the House of Battenberg was Julia Hauke, whose brother-in-law, Grand Duke Louis III of Hesse, created her Countess of Battenberg with the style Illustrious Highness in 1851 on the ocean of her morganatic marriage to Grand Duke Louis' brother Prince Alexander of Hesse and by Rhine. Julia was elevated in her title to Princess of Battenberg with the style Serene Highness in 1858. Two of Alexander and Julia's sons, Prince Henry of Battenberg and Prince Louis of Battenberg, became associated with the British royal family. Prince Henry married the Princess Beatrice, the youngest daughter of Queen Victoria. Prince Louis married Victoria's granddaughter, Princess Victoria of Hesse and by Rhine, and became the first Sea Lord of the Royal Navy, due to the anti-German feelings prevalent in Britain during World War I. Prince Louis, his children and his nephews, the living sons of Prince Henry, renounced their German titles and changed their name to the more English-sounding Mountbatten. They rejected an alternative translation, Button Hill. Their cousin George V compensated the princes with British peerages. Prince Louis became the first Marquess of Milford Haven, while Prince Alexander, Prince Henry's eldest son, became the first Marquess of Carisbrooke. So this explains well the prince's connection to the British royal family. Again, we can see how the Germans invaded the British royal bloodline during the Saxe-Coburg and Gotha dynasty, which essentially is the same dynasty as the House of Windsor. So they're still there. They're still living, but in and under a different name. They only changed names. Thus, the same German bloodlines, Prince Philip's being one of them, interbred with the British throne already in the 19th century through Queen Victoria's daughters, and it has continued ever since. It seems to me that the British royalty, for a specific reason, have decided to mix their blood with Prince Philip's bloodline. So Prince Philip and the Jewish connection. So Julia Hauke, or more correctly, Julia von Hauke, mentioned in the above, quote, the first member of the House of Battenberg is said to have been Jewish, which means Philip also had Jewish blood. Was this the reason the British royalty took German wives of the Battenberg bloodline? I would say so because of the presumed Jesus connection, where it is implied that Jesus was Jewish. Thus, there may have been an additional reason why Prince Philip changed his name. He had Jewish ancestry to hide. The Nazis even interrogated Philip's mother, suspecting her of being a Jew, but she pretended she had a hearing problem and couldn't understand them. So the Nazi interrogators became frustrated and let her go. They had lots of other people to interrogate. Prince Philip's ancestors, at least those on his mother's side, have interbred with the royal families of Europe by adding their Jewish blood. I know that people and even scholars say that Jesus was Jewish and that therefore the Merovingians and those who came after were Jewish as well. This is, as we discussed in the opening of this book, not true. However, because Jesus was born from an unfertilized egg and Mother Mary was not of the Davidian bloodline. To keep our memories fresh, let us repeat what we discussed at the beginning of the book and clear up the confusion around Jewish ancestry. So the Virgin Mary was not of the Davidian bloodline, as many assume, because Saint Anne and Saint Joachim, her alleged parents, were not her parents, which some scholars also have concluded. The Virgin Mary was of Isis' own bloodline, the Redheads, the androgynous, and the hermaphroditic. She was pure and free from sin, as the Bible tells us, because she was not of a bloodline full of baggage like her husband Joseph. She was impregnated by the what is being stated Holy Spirit, i.e., she impregnated herself, Isis being the only one of the three conspirators. The other two are Enki and Marduk, who was spirited. So, therefore, Jesus was of pure Isis Ninurta bloodline, and he was red-haired, something that must have stuck out in the Middle East in those days. Marduk was incarnated in Jesus' body, and the bloodline mix happened as planned. But Jesus was not Jewish, and he was probably what is known as white, just like in the pictures we see so often. He did not have a typical Middle Eastern look. The bloodline simply started with Jesus, who was the first offspring of a new and completely uncontaminated lineage, not connected with the diluted Davidian genes. So the overlords could start afresh. Therefore, the Merovingians were not Jewish either. They were the product of about 400 to 450 years of Jesus' gene pool, kept as pure as possible and protected by secret societies, such as the Priory of Sion. So no commoners like you and I could pollute the bloodline. It appears that Prince Philip was the first person with Jewish blood to marry into the British monarchy. But his Jewish blood is irrelevant, which the reader will understand when we now, review the different bloodlines of Noah. Noah being of the Enki Isis lineage. For those who want to study this in more detail, see the Orion book, volume 2, from the same writer, Wes Penry, pages 6 to 11. The Jewish branch we perhaps hear the most about is that of the Ashkenazim. But we have many branches of Judaism which all claim to originate from the same ancestor, i.e., Israel was the descendant of the first patriarch, Abraham. Israel, also named Jacob, is considered the first Hebrew. These Jews call themselves the Israelites. Israel/Jacob was Abraham's and Sarah's grandson, and it is from Jacob the land of Israel is named, and from where the term Israelites comes. And here is a kicker. If we break down the name Israel, we get is.ra.l, i.e. is from Isis, Ra from Marduk, El of Elohim. Jacob and Israel were the same, and therefore we have the relation to what is known as Jacob's ladder in the Old Testament, the ladder leading to the gods and from which the so-called God was symbolically descending to Jacob. The God of the Old Testament was Enki. The God of the New Testament is Marduk. So people are worshipping Marduk, and should know this and stop doing so. I would strongly suggest this was when Marduk and Isis created their bloodline, the Semitic bloodline. So we have a bloodline created from Marduk Isis, a bloodline created from Enki Isis, a bloodline created Enki Isis Ninurta, and a bloodline Marduk Isis Ninurta, but also a bloodline Marduk Ereshkigal, which is the dark version, so to say, of Isis. The uh, uh, she's also referred to Ereshkigal as the queen of the underworld. So this is also a bloodline, and Ereshkigal is also a more dark-haired, dark red-haired uh, woman, so to say. And so we also have to deal with that. There are people whom are carriers of the Marduk Ereshkigal bloodline. So now you get to understand why DNA is of such an importance to the overlords and why they do everything to lure humans into do all sorts of DNA tests, such as Ancestry.com, to get information on how the percentages of the bloodlines is and who is carrying whose bloodline. Um, so then they come to know which bloodline is the more dominant one. Um, so, and then Jacob/Israel started seeding the so-called 12 tribes of Israel. Therefore, this is another point in history when Isis was present. So Jacob married because he was told by God to do so. Leah and Rachel were two twin sisters who supposedly gave Jacob the 12 sons, founding the 12 tribes of Israel. But wait, none of the two wives carries the names Mary, Elizabeth, or Sophia. Well, if we investigate what Leah and Rachel mean in translation, it's known as, one is Leah is known as cow, and Rachel is known as Eve or Eve, respectively. Who was the cow goddess? That was Hathor. And who was Hathor or Hathor? That was Isis. Then who was Eve? That was also Isis. Leah is the elder daughter of Laban and the wife of Jacob, father of 12 sons who will become the 12 tribes of Israel. Leah and her sister Rachel, whose names mean cow and Eve, give Jacob many sons, and their father gives him actual livestock. However, Isis cannot be two women at once, presumably. So which one was Isis? None of the two. Leah and Rachel must have been daughters of the real Isis, who named them after her attributes. Because the name can also be referring to an attribute. It can be used as a title, but it also can refer to an attribute. The Bible tells us that the sisters' father was Laban and their mother was Adina or Adinah, which translates to gentle or mild, from Hebrew to English. These seem to be two attributes of Isis, both as the Virgin Mary and as Mary Magdalene, and other potential Isis incarnation. And other potential Isis incarnations. If Adina was Isis, she would have named her twin daughters after other attributes connected to her. So I, Wes Penry, the writer of this book, hypothesis, Jacob needed two wives to seat 12 male children, thus the twins. Now we dive into the different branches of Jews. The Ashkenazim are, from all I can tell, not true Jews. Ashkenazi means, here it comes, German in medieval Hebrew, and only shows that these people who were nomads settled down in Germany before they spread out across the world, but they also still reside in Germany. So they choose the name Ashkenazi because they settled in Germany. They are Nordics, just like Northern Europeans and Russians, and have little to do with being Jewish by blood, other than from when they have interbred with actual Jews. But so have we other Gentiles. They are no more Jews than I am, and I am a Gentile, except by faith and interbreeding. Another branch of Jews is the Sephardim, or Hispanics. Sepharad means Hispania or Iberia in Hebrew. They are the Mediterranean, between quotation marks, Jews, although dividing the Jewish communities into only two factions is to oversimplify it. But I mention only these two factions in particular for the purpose of this book. Those who want to dig deeper into the history of Judaism can search Wikipedia for Jewish ethnic division. That's a good place to start. However, genetic studies have shown that both culturally and physically they all originate from the same common ancient Israelite population anyway, namely the Hebrews, through the 12 tribes of Israel. This may be correct, but the Ashkenazim are not part of any of these tribes, as we shall see. Now we will go into a review of the post-Diluvian Noah bloodlines. Before we continue, we must review what I wrote in the Orion book, volume 2. I said there were 3 main branches of Noah's bloodline after the flood, and it is the Enki-Isis bloodline that was the lineage. Enki wanted to save back then, when the flood swept across the earth. It was his pure bloodline, and Noah was the last descendant of this lineage. So now you get the understanding of this sentence in the Bible in which it is being stated that God has, a good heart toward Noah. So there is this line, because the God of the Old Testament is Enki. One branch became the black people from Africa. The black Africans are the descendants of Noah's son Ham. The second Noah bloodline was that of Marduk Isis, the Shem lineage. Although all three bloodlines were of Enki Isis to begin with. According to my recent research, I put the time when Prince Ninurta/Enlil castrated Enki to about 2024 BCE, which aligns well with the Sumerian texts, when Enki left Earth and never returned. After that, the breeding project to keep the bloodlines pure came on Marduk, who then created the Marduk-Isis bloodline by infiltrating a part of the Shem bloodline, which became the Semitic bloodline, from where the Hebrews stem. The timeline fits perfectly with the biblical texts, which propose that Abraham, the Ark Jew/Hebrew, lived in the 18th century BCE, just about 300 years after Enki was thrown into the Apsu/abyss. Abraham was the beginning of the Marduk-Isis bloodline and that of the Hebrews. Therefore, the Mediterranean Jews can claim to be descendant of Abraham. Lately, black African Jews claim to be the true Israelites, but that is not correct since they are of Ham's descendants, i.e. the Enki-Isis bloodline, directly from Noah. Last of the three main bloodlines is the Japhet lineage, which are the Nordic and Eurasian tribes, i.e. the Northern Europeans and the Russians for the most part. The Ashkenazi, between quotation marks, Jews belong to this tribe, to the Japhet tribe, and so do many of you who read this, me included. We are of the Marduk Ereshkigal bloodline. Even more likely, most of the Nordic people are a mix of the Marduk, Isis, and Marduk Ereshkigal gene pools. Interesting this. This may sound complicated because the Nordic people have existed much longer than 4,000 plus years, and the Marduk Ereshkigal lineage is more recent than the Marduk-Isis bloodline. However, when Marduk and Ereshkigal created their own bloodline, they did a new branch of it, which included Ereshkigal's DNA. Therefore, we Nordic people are for the most part a mix of the original Japhet line and that of Marduk and Ereshkigal. The Ashkenazim converted to Judaism around 900 CE. But they did not originate there. This is what a deep study from 2013 of the Ashkenazim showed. A 2013 study of Ashkenazi mitochondrial DNA by a team led by Martin B. Richards agreed with the older hypothesis of the origin. It tested all 16,600 DNA units of empty DNA and found that the four main female Ashkenazi founders had descent lines that were established in Europe 10,000 to 20,000 years in the past, while most of the remaining minor founders also have a deep European ancestry. The study argued that the great majority of Ashkenazi maternal lineages were not brought from the Near East or the Caucasus, but instead assimilated within Europe, primarily of Italian and Old French origins. The study estimated that more than 80% of the Ashkenazi maternal ancestry comes from women indigenous to mainly prehistoric Western Europe, and only 8% from the Near East, while the origin of the remainder is undetermined. Because 80% of these people originate in Western Europe, it makes them of the Japhet bloodline, the non-Jewish one, now mixed with that of Ereshkigal. Technically, they can still call themselves Jews, since they converted to Judaism, by which they are accepted into the Jewish community. With all this explained, we can see that the Jewish mix with the non-Jewish British bloodline and other European Jesus Magdalene blood-based European dynasties is irrelevant. The Jesus bloodline includes Isis, Marduk's, and most importantly, Ninurta's blood DNA, and the Marduk-Isis-Shem bloodline includes the same DNA, but not as pure as the original Jesus lineage of the Merovingians. Therefore, I would suggest that to various degrees, the Marduk-Isis bloodline mixed with that of different dynasties amplifies the Jesus line after 2,000 years of gradual decline. So my conclusion is that Prince Philip's Jewish blood took nothing away from the British bloodline. Of course, it is uncertain whether Prince Philip was of Ashkenazi or Sephardic descent. If it is the former, it would take away from the pure blood. Now we come into a very interesting piece of information that is all about Hitler, the Holocaust, and the Semitic bloodline. So far we have learned that these Semitic people are of the Marduk-Isis and not the Enki-Isis bloodline. This means this bloodline of Hebrew descendants should be something that at least Marduk would like to preserve. So why did Hitler, being Marduk's puppet, wish to terminate Jews? A similar thing went on in Russia under Joseph Stalin. Now, please pay close attention to this section and read carefully, because it will be very important when you continue reading. It all connects. So let us start. Hitler and his genetic scientists dug deeply into human genome and heritage. Based on the development in Nazi Germany, I think we can safely say that Hitler was aware of Noah's sons' bloodlines. I also discussed this in the Orion books, that Marduk and Enki fight for the ultimate power over humanity. They are fighting to have ultimate power over each and every human being here on earth. Let this sink in your mind, please. And Germany is and has been for long Marduk's domain. However, it was fairly recently Marduk ceded the Marduk-Reshkagal bloodline, which he now wants to become the dominant bloodline, because that is where he donated most of his genes to, and where did he foremost seed his DNA among the general population? In the Nordic Japhet bloodline, i.e., the bloodline he now wants to dominate the earth. So now we also come to an understanding of the so-called war between Russia, the Western world, and Ukraine, and the involvement of America. If you know how the Enki-Isis bloodline is, and the Enki-Isis-Marduk bloodline is, and the Marduk-Isis bloodline is, and the Marduk-Ereshkigal bloodline is, then you now know that all these wars are not about the things that mainstream media is trying to fool us into and trying to make us believe that that is the story. What I continuously are saying, all the wars on earth are all about bloodlines. So this gives another perspective of the war that is going on between Russia and Ukraine, and why Ukraine has been almost taken over by the United States. It all has to do with bloodlines, and not with what mainstream media talking heads are trying to make us believe that it is. Marduk and the Khan kings, whom are Syrian kings from the Sirius star system, manipulated Hitler into believing this bloodline is descended in a straight line from the Aryan lineage, also known as the Namlu'u. And Aryan is also translated to modern Orion, which is of course false, and Marduk obviously knows this. Of course he knows. He just wanted to give Hitler a carrot. We know from convincing evidence that Hitler was in a psychic connection with the, between quotation marks, Superman from beneath the earth, as he had been told, between brackets, the Marduk clan of overlords. And he intensely feared them. This is described in detail in the book The Spear of Destiny by Trevor Ravenscroft. So it is my theory that Hitler was hoodwinked by Marduk and his Khan supporters to believe the modified Japhet line was the pure human bloodline, which is not so. It is highly likely, as I see it, that Marduk, to gain full power over Enki and to prepare for the singularity, still 100 years in the future back then, wanted to destroy the entire Shem bloodline and perhaps eventually also the Ham lineage, the black people left on earth would be his new bloodline mixed with those of the royal houses of Europe, which we will talk about later, in which Marduk had invested his DNA as Jesus. So Marduk is in the New Testament representing not only God but also Jesus. This is his way of dominating the human soul group through his DNA. Hitler might or might not have known that the Ashkenazim were not Jews but of Japhet's line. Regardless, according to geneticists, the Ashkenazim are inbred with the Hebrew Jews, so they had to go too. I read this again. So they, the Ashkenazim, had to go too because of the interbreeding with the Hebrew Jews. The same applied to the Gypsies. Everything had to go, except for what Hitler considered the purer form of the Japhet bloodline, i.e. those who qualified as accepted by the overlords, those of the Isis Ereshkigal gene pool. He was even attacking the Ashkenazi banking elite, and this was part of a side agenda that also had to do with the Jews. Hitler wanted to stop what he considered the Jews' usurping practices, afraid they, although a minority, would increase in power through their control of the banking industry and the wealth random Jewish families were gathering because of their greed and usurping businesses. So Hitler was a typical narcissist and psychopath, which means he saw everything in black and white. No shades of gray. He saw the greed of the Ashkenazim, so he wanted to root out them too, including the banking elite. And he eventually banned all secret societies from Germany, save his own. Marduk might not have wanted the latter to happen, at least. But on the other hand, I do not think the warlords from Sirius was particularly concerned about whether Hitler would get hold of the Rothschilds and their ilk. He knew Hitler would never get to them. Marduk would see to that. So Marduk would prevent Hitler from doing so. The banking elite was still useful to them. Marduk would see that too. So the banking elite was still useful and could be replaced later. This is an oxymoron, it may seem, because Hitler stunningly was Jewish. Somehow the overlords had apparently promised to spare him because of his great work, which they would not eventually. Of course, Hitler failed in his bold attempt, and it was a setback for Marduk. Or was it? In my conversation with the Orion source, he conveyed that the entire Germany was at that time destined to be completely and entirely slaughtered in a monstrous genocide of the entire German population. And this is what the documentary Hellstorm is all about. And this genocide would feed the gods who could have an extravagant feast in Valhalla, prey on an abundance of loosh, and loosh is soul energy, when people were slaughtered in droves. Human life energy, i.e. soul and spiritual energy, and vril, which is cosmic energy. That is loosh. That is what is termed also for the overlords as loosh, gained from the spirited humans. Um, but why did Marduk want to sacrifice his own people? And moreover, the bloodline he told Hitler he preferred. Because Marduk has no morals and ethics akin to a normal person. No, because Marduk is a full-blown psychopath and tyrant that wants to rule over Earth and over all humans, and thus over each and every life form here, but that of a psychopath. Psychopaths are extremely calculating and goal-driven, and they are prepared to take any action to reach their goal, regardless if this will cost uncountable life forms, lives. Regarding Marduk's plans for Hitler, it was not particularly about a culling of the world population to keep the number of people down. The true motive had to do with that there were too many mixed bloods among the German population. The entire World War II was one monumental bloodline cleansing. Marduk wanted to get rid of all traces of the ISIS bloodline. So again, the entire World War II was one monumental bloodline cleansing. And Marduk wanted to get rid of all the traces of the ISIS bloodline, even his own Marduk ISIS genome. No more ISIS. Why? And here it comes. Because before the singularity, he wanted as many people as possible in the world to be of his new Marduk Ereshkigal bloodline. So only he and his fellow Syrians could control and ride the human avatars, and because of doing this, then Marduk can claim each and every human being as his possession. Hopefully you now understand all the things that are happening in the world. So only he and his fellow Syrians could control and ride the human avatars, and also control our minds through theirs. Now we come to the aspect of cosmic narcissism, sociopathy, and psychopathy, because the Syrian Khan kings and the Syrian overlords and many of the Syrian beings coming from the Syrian star system are, in actuality, many of them are sociopaths, psychopaths, tyrants. The Sirius star system wants to claim the Orion universe and wants to sit on the throne of Orion universe. And they are using the entire human soul group to accomplish this last um, agenda. So this means that you unwillingly become part of this gigantic cosmic future war. Do you want this? I don't. And now you get to understand why they want to have the human soul group connected to the cloud, because the cloud is the hive mind system through which they, the overlords, and thus Marduk, can control each and every human being, but also animals. So now you get hopefully a deeper understanding of the entire artificial intelligence and the push to use this. Because every time if you use AI, it sucks a piece of your consciousness into it. So why did Marduk not introduce the Marduk-Ereshkigal bloodline much earlier? Why did he use Isis as a breeder for so long? I believe one reason was England. Marduk had always had a problem with England, historically known to refuse to follow Marduk's twist and turn in plans. Marduk waited for the right moment, and it eventually came, as most of us understand by now, the Nazi philosophy did not die out with the end of the World War II. Better said, it is still there and it is on its return. The entire project moved to the United States, where Nazi scientists were secretly transferred to America after the Second World War through Operation Paperclip, and the Catholic Church, better said the Pope of the Vatican, also made this happen, thus saving their lives and using them to further propel the agenda leading to the singularity. They used brilliant Nazi scientists such as Werner von Braun and Joseph Mengele, from among many other Nazi scientists who were smuggled out of Nazi Germany before the Nuremberg trials took place. And then a last piece, and then the last part 3, is all about the Spencer bloodline, and then we go into the story of Princess Diana and whom she was. So as last, the German invasion. So back in 1714, the German dynasty of Hanover completely took over the British crown, and the old British bloodline became overlay mixed with German blood, which is of great significance, as we shall see. So King George I was of almost pure German royal blood, and his wife Queen Sophia Dorothea of Celle was also German. Therefore, their offspring were all Germans, not British at all. So how did this happen? Without getting entrenched in too many boring details, we could say, in summary, that in case there were no British offspring of William III of the House of Stuart, the British throne would go to Sophia of Hanover and or her offspring. Sophia was the daughter of Elizabeth Stuart, a daughter of James I of England. All these, Elizabeth and Sophia, again with a Mary thrown in here and there as well for good measures. Big things were apparently in the making. Elizabeth Stuart was married to Frederick V of Bohemia, Elector of Palatine, German. So Sophia of Hanover was half German and half English. Now it so, between quotation marks, happened that King William III, who reigned from 1689 to 1702, was childless. What a surprise! He was British, Scottish, and the great-grandson of James I, who from who King James Bible stems from. Circumstances had it that a few years followed until Sophia's of Hanover bloodline could legally take over. Thus, from King William's death in 1702 until King George of Hanover, Sophia's son, could inherit the throne. Princess Anne, James II's daughter, consort to King George of Denmark, ruled for 12 years. Thereafter, George I became King of England and the first monarch of the House of Hanover. Ever since, the British crown has been almost completely of German blood, and by Queen Elizabeth II marrying Prince Philip of significant German blood, the German bloodline was even strengthened. The official story is that it so happened that George I from Germany must put himself on the British throne against his will, but what was truly going on behind the scenes? To understand that more clearly, we need to start investigating the Marduk-Ereshkigal bloodline, which will be thoroughly done in a later chapter. And with this said, I have come to the end of reading this second part of the that is all about the royal crown, the English royal crown, which is in actuality not English at all. So the third part dives into the Spencer bloodline, which is the bloodline of Princess Diana, and then we go deeper into whom she was and why all this Isis symbolism was all around her, why Paris was chosen as the assassination stage. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in, for listening along through Facebook, through YouTube, and through Rumble. So thank you so much, and see you next time. And let us listen to a short piece of music created by Ben Sound, titled Hope. Next time.